banana company once controlled laws, presidents, and entire nations. It toppled governments, sparked coups, and shaped U.S. foreign policy while the world kept eating bananas like nothing ever happened. Here's the story you were never supposed to hear. It sounds unbelievable today, almost like the plot of a political thriller. A corporation toppling governments, a fruit company wielding more power than sovereign states, a boardroom deciding the fate of nations. But this wasn't fiction. For decades across Latin America, the balance of power wasn't between presidents and parliaments, but between presidents and the United Fruit Company. A corporation so wealthy, so politically connected, and so embedded in U.S. foreign policy that some Central American countries felt more like subsidiaries than nations. If empires usually arrive under a flag, this one arrived under a logo, and the strangest part is that most of the world barely noticed. Where money, power, and history collide to understand how a banana company came to manipulate or overthrow governments, you have to step into the late 19th century. Bananas were becoming a global commodity, but they spoiled fast. Companies didn't just need farmland. They needed ports, railroads, warehouses, ice-cooled ships, and governments that never interfered. The United Fruit Company, formed in 1899, mastered this model. It owned plantations, railroads, shipping fleets, and controlled national economies dependent on banana exports. In places like Costa Rica, Honduras, and Guatemala, UFCO became an employer, landowner, transportation monopoly, and political force. In 1904, Writer-O. Henry coined a term after watching Honduras shaped entirely around foreign banana companies. He called it a banana republic, a nation whose sovereignty bent under outside control. As United Fruit expanded, more countries fit the description. The company bought millions of acres, sometimes fertile, sometimes useless, because ownership meant leverage. If UFCO owned the only rail lines to the port, no one else could reach global markets. Workers lived in company towns, were paid in company script, and bought goods from company stores. The entire economic cycle began and ended with United Fruit. Railroads in Central America often run in strange patterns because they weren't built for nations, they were built for plantations. They connected banana fields to ports and nowhere else, giving UFCO even deeper leverage. And when governments tried regulating these railways, the company reminded them who financed their debts. Infrastructure became influence, and influence became coercion. But United Fruit's real power came from politics. It supported presidents who offered tax exemptions, land concessions, and labor suppression. And when those leaders threatened its interests, UFCO relied on something even more powerful than money, the foreign policy of the United States. During the early 20th century, Washington was determined to protect U.S. business abroad. UFCO learned to frame its struggles as national security issues. A labor strike became a communist threat. A tax increase became foreign aggression. Profit was reframed as patriotism. One early example came in Honduras in 1911, when U.S. warships and Marines intervened to protect UFCO's holdings. The message to Latin American governments was clear: threaten United Fruit's profits, and the U.S. might treat it as an attack on the nation. All of this was merely the prelude to the most infamous corporate intervention in Latin American history. Guatemala, 1954. President Jacobo Arbenz, elected in 1951, saw hundreds of thousands of acres of idle UFCO land as a national crisis. Guatemala was a poor, unequal country where 2% of landowners held over 70% of the land. Arbenz proposed land reform. Unused land over a certain size would be expropriated and compensated at the value owners declared for taxes. UFCO had long claimed its unused land was nearly worthless, about $3 an acre. When Arbenz offered to pay that exact amount, the company reacted with outrage. United Fruit wasn't just a company, it had allies at the highest levels of U.S. power. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles had worked for the law firm representing the company. CIA Director Allen Dulles had been on its board. UFCO launched a PR campaign portraying Arbenz as a communist threat. Evidence was thin, but Cold War fear was a powerful tool. In 1954, the CIA launched Operation PB Success. It trained a small exile force, broadcast false radio reports of uprisings, bribed officers, and created the illusion of a massive rebel army. Believing his military was abandoning him, Arbenz resigned. The new regime reversed land reform and protected UFCO's holdings. Guatemala soon descended into decades of violence, eventually costing over 200,000 lives. United Fruit celebrated the coup as good business. Elsewhere, the company pressured governments to break strikes, as seen in the 1928 Santa Marta massacre in Colombia. In Honduras, leaders rose and fell depending on their friendliness to UFCO. In Costa Rica, Panama, and Nicaragua, concessions made the company a parallel state owning ports, telegraphs, and major infrastructure. At its peak, United Fruit earned the nickname El Pulpo, the octopus, for its vast reach into national life. Though its influence seems extraordinary, what's striking is how little the average American or European knows about it. The banana republics shaped borders, economies, and political movements that define Latin America today, yet they rarely appear in Western textbooks. In the US, the company is remembered as a quirky fruit importer. In Latin America, it is remembered as a force that fractured nations. The legacy didn't end. The tools changed. Today, corporations no longer topple governments with private armies, but they shape policy through supply chains, financial leverage, and digital platforms. Tech giants control global communication. Energy and mining companies influence land debates. Private security firms fill gaps where states are weak. The logic remains. When markets depend on compliant governments, companies incentivize compliant governments. The story of the banana republics isn't about bananas. It's about what happens when economic power grows faster than political power. When sovereignty becomes negotiable. When a nation's fate can shift in a boardroom. And it asks a question still relevant today. Who truly governs, the state or the interests that fund it? If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. That light lives in you too.